I am so honored to be able to introduce my friend and somebody I certainly have admired for a long time, as I'm sure almost everybody in this room knows, Sheila Cascade. I believe she's the only person in the state of Minnesota who has been elected to our state senate, first as a Republican, then she was elected as an independent, then she was elected as a Democrat, and I happened to be standing in her office the day that the Republicans decided they didn't want her to caucus with them anymore. They hadn't told her, they'd only told the janitors, and they were moving her desk out of her office. But just hadn't unplugged the phone yet, and she got a call from the majority leader of the Democrats, who then ran the Senate, asking her, would she like to come? And he had an office for her and caucus with them. She could be an independent, caucus with them. And I think you even got a chairmanship out of that. Yes. After her illustrious time at the Capitol, she also decided to run for county board. And of course, she knew all those issues because the county is so involved with the state. And wait till she tells you some of her stories. So being a senator with a young family back in Rochester, back when not that many women were elected. She has some great stories to tell about that. And also, as she's the policy queen, she can tell you all the different policies she has worked on. So without any more, here is Sheila Cascade.
The truth is, I can't tell you all the policies I've worked on because there's been too many of them for many, many years. I had a good chance to talk to a couple of young students here today. And I did expect that I would see mostly people that I know from the league from over the years, and they would be kind of in my era, shall we say. And I think this is a much more mixed group than I expected to see. And I want to talk a little bit about the career arc I've had. And Amy is the one who really kind of outlined for me how I should organize my presentation. She said, she said, I always talked about policies, personalities, politics, and power as the elements of what happens in elected office. And so I am going to try and tell you a few stories around each of those themes. And you know, someone at my stage of life just loves to talk about their life and what they learned over the years and all the surprises. And let me just say that I never, ever, ever thought that I would have the kind of career that I have had. I never, ever, ever expected to be in elected office. And it's just been a really wonderful arc over time. But let me start this way. There are people in this room who are also elected officials or who have run for office. And would I ask that they please stand up. If you are an elected official or if you've run for office, would you please stand up?
I serve on Rochester City Council for the second ward.
Kathy Nathan, Rochester School Board Chair.
Karen McLaughlin, Rochester School Board.
Stephanie Felton, former county commissioner. And I can't believe that Mark and Stephanie are here because, I mean, they've had to listen to my stories of life for 12 years, and they probably really think they'd be bored to death and not want to listen to me whatsoever. But hey, thank you guys. Appreciate that. So,
The rainy day.
so Stephanie just always says, and Mark always makes me know where the line is. You know, don't cross that. So, let me just say, I used to live in this neighborhood just a couple blocks away. We did a lot of things in this room over the years. And when I came here in 1970, I was told I would stay here for 3 years. My husband was with IBM and some other friends up here. And, you know, don't get used to being here because I've already been here 2 years and I'll only last for about 3 more and then I'll be moved. So don't get established here. Well, it is now, 55 years later, and we are still here all but 2 years that he had a rotation in New York. And I will tell you, I hated it. I couldn't wait to leave Rochester. I found it really a suffocating place for a woman in their 20s. Couldn't find meaningful work, couldn't find a connection into the community, and I was really frustrated. I did not want to stay here. And, you know, some of what we talk about even now about Rochester, about being a welcoming community. You talk to young women, there's a young woman that I got to meet this last year, is about 23. She's having the same experience that I had moving here. It's partly Minnesota culture, but at the time that I moved here, we were 96% white. We were very much focused on IBM. IBM was bigger at the time than Mayo. And so we were focused on the educated population that had these kind of technological, healthcare, prestigious jobs. And if you didn't fit into those categories, I was a teacher. I moved here in September. We decided to get married in August and we got married in September. So of course, most of my family thought that there would be a blessed event within a few months. But that was not the case. It was 11 years when we had children. I couldn't find a meaningful job. I had spent a year in South America as an undergraduate. And I want to tell you about an experience I had there that was pivotal for me. And there's a few events in my life that are really pivotal. This was one. So I'm 20 years old. I'm an exchange student from the University of Minnesota at Santiago, Chile, during the Vietnam War years. So I'm learning a lot about how our nation is viewed by press coverage that is not in favor of America. And I am reading in the paper about the number of young women who we were told at the time that hospital beds, 40% of the hospital beds in Chile at that time were occupied by women who had had complications from illegal abortion. And I had a 14-year-old girl from the country who was I lived with the family, who was the family maid. And you would read about these infanticide cases, and they were almost always young women who were the maids in these families. That had a huge impact on me. I was a boarder. I was not hosted by this family. I was boarding with this family. And one morning I woke up in beautiful weather in Santiago in the spring. And we didn't even have screens on our windows. So we opened the shutters, and there was like from here to the curb, there was a little iron fence for the front yard. The family, a middle-class family. The woman was a widow. The father had been a doctor. One of the sons was a doctor. They had 4 children. And so I was helping family income by boarding with them, right? And there was this noise at the curb. And I went to my window and I looked out. There was this little girl, about 8 years old. And she had a little brother and another little brother. And she was holding a baby. And they were going through our garbage. I still see that. I see it so vividly. I toured places in Chile where there were 10,000 people and 1 water faucet. So I came back thinking people should only have as many children as they really want, they can really afford. And that was a fundamental belief of mine that I hold today. And so when I'm here in Rochester trying to find my place in the community, I was 27 years old and I read Planned Parenthood was opening a regional program. I became the first regional coordinator for 8 counties establishing reproductive health care services in this area. And it was very controversial. We were housed at the public health department for about a year until people protested and the county board said, you can't be here, you have to move. So then we rented another location. It's over on 3rd Avenue. It's actually Olmsted Medical Group has part of that building now. And someone protested to that landlord, and that landlord said, you have to move. And then Gus Shafoulias, remember Gus, those of you who've been around a long time, owned Osco Drugs building downtown Rochester, which is long gone, where the Devil Free is now. And he rented space to us. And we worked with, where's Allison? Allison's husband, Andy Good, was a resident, and he was one of our physicians. And we did reproductive health care, no abortion. We did reproductive health care services there. I left them in 1976. Now you're going to be surprised why I left. I left because the state agency decided they were going to offer abortion. Now I believe it's your choice, but I also believe the way that they made the decision was not honest with the staff, because all of us in Greater Minnesota had said, don't do that. Because you're only gonna do this in one location. There's already many sites where you can have an abortion if you choose to. We don't counsel for abortion. We don't, it's a personal choice. You do this and we're gonna spend all of our time dealing with that issue instead of the reproductive health care services that women need. Well, the executive director pulled it off with the board. They decided to do it, and I decided to leave because I thought they're going to spend forever talking about abortion. And here we are 50 years later, and Planned Parenthood Minnesota is still embroiled in the abortion debate. No, that was their choice. They feel that they want to stand for that. That's fine. But I did not want to be part of that ongoing fight forever. So that's a political decision that I made early in my career. We were at the place where we would go into a restaurant, our staff would eat and would nudge each other. There were only like 50,000 people in the county and in Rochester, and we were known, the staff, Planned Parenthood, people knew who we were.
Oh, wow.
So I decided that was the point at which I really thought, I can't stay here anymore. What are you going to do? So I applied for various jobs. Now, these young women, not only was that the abortion decision happened in 1972 that made it illegal, but in the 1970s, those of us who moved around the room, several of you were in my age group in the 70s. As a woman, I could not get my own credit. As a woman, I could not buy property. As a woman, if the post bulletin had my name in the paper, it would be Mrs. Richards. They did not use the woman's name. It was the first in the mid-70s, was the first time that we had women run for city council. We had women on the school board before that. Nancy Gratis in 1976 was the first woman to decide to run for the Minnesota Senate and to run on her own. I put some pictures from the Senate back on the table where the daffodils are. There's pictures of Nancy, there's pictures of Dave Bishop. Go look at those pictures for those of you who've been around for a long time. Nancy had a lot of courage to run. And yet, 18 years later, the Republican Party refused to endorse her because she was pro-choice and too liberal for the party. And she recruited me to run. Now, why would she recruit me? Again, I have never been involved in politics. The most I'd ever done is put up a lawn sign. That was only for women, by the way. That way. So in 1992, this is what I look like. I don't really look like this much anymore. But why did she come for me? Well, she came for me because in 1981, the state legislature, in its infinite wisdom, decided to close the Rochester State Hospital. This was a political decision, not a policy decision. The Senate and House were Democrats, and they passed a bill for the Human Services budget that was $6 or $7 million over budget. Governor Quee, a Republican who had been in Congress before, vetoed the Human Services bill. In their infinite wisdom, the Senate chair of the committee, Steve Dorsey, said, "Oh, guess what? Rochester State Hospital's budget is exactly the one we have to balance our budget. We'll get the governor. We're going to close the Rochester State Hospital." So with 6 weeks' notice, the county had to start looking at what are we going to do about the 650 patients, the 650 employees at a campus of 300 acres of all of those buildings. What are we going to do? Right at that same time, the director of human services for the county, social services, died. So here they are. I was on maternity leave. And the county administrator called me up and said, "Sheila, I know you're on maternity leave. We are really in trouble, and we really need you to come back. Under what terms will you come back?" So I went back half-time and worked with, they put together a citizen task force. Jane Campion was the chair, I was her staff, and we worked for 2 years on what we could do around closure of that hospital. At the end, we decided the county should acquire that hospital, that campus. Now, part of the reason was that campus had an incinerator. It was already sited. That is the location of the Olmsted County Waste to Energy facilities now. It solved a huge problem for the county and not have that debate, because we knew that that was the environmentally friendly way to handle our waste. We knew that we couldn't find a place for doing a landfill. We knew that the landfill we had was in trouble. And so that was a political decision. So I was assigned to go get the legislature to sell us that property for $1. Who would I work with? Nancy Bradis and Dave Bishop, right? And they were spending $1 million a year to mothball it. So it wasn't a very hard sell. They agreed to sell it to us. And we then had the problem of, oh, now what to do with all those buildings. So we looked at a variety of things, and eventually the Federal Bureau of Prisons came, which was, if you're any of you around when that debate went on here in the county, oh my, that was so heated and so awful. Elected officials lost their positions. There were huge fights in the community and a lot of fear. Who wants to have a federal prison at the edge of the East Side Pioneers neighborhood, Martin Luther King Park? Who wants that, right? Well, now, do you ever even think about it? Really? Now we were told we only have 580 patients. That's what they promised us. Now they have over, I believe, over 1,000. It is a good neighbor. They wanted that location because of Mayo, because it's a medical facility. So obviously they have people who do groundskeeping and other things that are doing their time there, but it's also because of the medical facility. So that became sometimes the thing that in politics, the thing that's the most difficult to do ends up being a community benefit later. You can't always see how it's going to end. And you do have to listen to what the citizens have to say, but you also have to look at the longer range needs and what are the broader needs of the community. Anyway, that's because of that work, the county decided that they needed to have the county's human service plan, that I should go to the legislature every year and talk to the legislators about what county government needs. Now, you probably don't realize that in Minnesota, we have 87 counties, and we're a creature of the state of Minnesota. Counties are mandated to provide all sorts of services that the legislature requires counties to do in public health, corrections, human services, land use planning, environmental protection. There's all sorts of things. And not only do they require you to do it, they require you to do it under their terms and their rules. And often the money doesn't follow. So counties have a lot to say with legislators about the impact of the decisions that they make and how services are provided and what the tax implications would be for your property taxes. That's the one kind of source that counties have. So I did that for a year or two. And then remember I told you we went to New York for 2 years. I went off to New York for a couple of years, came back and thought, I don't really want to work for the county again. I'm going to start a consulting practice. So I did practice for a lot of counties, and I did a lot of health and human services organizations in the whole region. So one of the things we don't always appreciate here in Ulster County is that we are resource rich, not just dollars, but talent. And also because of the resources that we have in Olmsted County, we are able to provide a whole variety of services that other counties mandated by the state don't have the capacity to provide. And so Olmsted County is proud of the fact that they try to be innovative in how we deliver human services. And they try to really focus on front end, early intervention, prevention, rather than solving problems later. And so that's reinforced with the human services staff and the public health staff, that you really want to be looking, upstream. We talk about going upstream rather than dealing with things when they get the most complicated. To give you an example, when I was that county human service planner, I was assigned by the county to go help Waseca County develop their comprehensive social services plan. At that point, you don't have to do that anymore. At that point, every county had to submit a comprehensive plan for 2 years. So I've done the Olmsted County one, that was fine. I went over to do the Waseca County one. Well, this was a long time ago, so it was middle 80s. Waseca County had exactly 2 social workers. Those 2 social workers were to deal with child protection issues. They were to deal with vulnerable adults. They were to deal with disabilities. They were to deal with family disruption. With social workers, adoption, all sorts of things. In Olmsted County, we have staff dedicated to those functions. Waseca County can't do that. And when we talk about politics today in Minnesota, part of the big rural-urban divide is that we have a lot of demands of big government from counties that haven't got the capacity to provide. So, you know, we have what, 8 judges? You can have a county with 4,000 people and 1 judge that covers 3 counties. They don't have the human resources that we have. And they can't offer the salaries and the compensation that Homestead County can offer to have the talent. Homestead County has a lot of talent. And you all benefit, we all benefit from that as well. So when I got to the legislature, as Amy said, you know, I didn't want to run. For you. I was Nancy Gratis. How many of you remember Nancy? Oh, good, lots of you. Well, then you know that when Nancy called, you weren't invited, you were summoned. Nancy Gratis called me, summoned me to her house, and she said that she had been thinking for personal reasons, she had not been endorsed by the party. This was in 1992. She hadn't been endorsed by the Republicans in 1990. And she was not going to run. So she was looking for someone who would run for her seat. And I said, me? Me? And she said, yeah, you. And Dave Bishop called me, yeah, we want you to run. I said, no. But I've been there. I know what it's like. For 4 years, I went up there all the time. I used to go up to the legislature, and I would, in my first couple of years, I'd be like, oh God, I can't even fix the county board because I don't know what in the hell is going on. And I can't figure out who to talk to or what to do. And like, based on their paying me to do this, they're paying my money. Was embarrassed. It's really a very complicated place. And for them to kind of come along and say, I could run it and be the senator. But I know what it's like. And I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old. And I know how intense this is. And no, thank you. Well, you don't say no nicely. Take that. So she ran a 3-week campaign where she had people calling me. She would deliver 3-ring binders of campaigns that she has run in different parts of the country because she had a consulting business. She had people knocking on my door. She had Dave Bishop come see me. She had Dave Bishop bring his campaign here. She ran this campaign to get me to say yes. And so finally, my husband said, you know, Sheila, we'd been married by that time, 23 years. So it was 1992, 22 years. He said, you know, you've never found your right role here. You've never really fit really in, never really loved it here. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. You shouldn't say no. So I called Lee Lube, who was a county commissioner in Winona County that I'd gotten to know. And she had 6 children. And I said, Lee, I've been encouraged to run for the legislature. You know, I just need some advice. And she said, well, look, Sheila, I know that you can do the job, but what you have to figure out is your family. So my oldest 3 children, by the time I ran, they were teenagers. My youngest 3 have a really strong relationship with their dad that my oldest 3 don't have because I did it all. You know, I was the primary parent. So she said, I think you can do the job. But what you need to do is you need to ask your husband, is he ready to be here? So I went home. He came home. And I said, well, you know, Lube thinks that I can do the job, but the real critical question is, are you ready to be the primary parent? And he said, well, what does that mean? I said, well, it means like, you know, when you go to the school conferences and the kids get sick, you come home. If there's an issue, you deal with it. He said, I need to think about this. He went away for 3 days. I thought about it. And he came back and said, it's your turn. It's your turn. I will do it. And in all honesty, he really did do it. He started coming home at 4:30 in the afternoon instead of 6 o'clock at night. Housekeeper who called me up and said, she'd been our nanny when the kids were small. She called and said, honey, if you're going to run for the legislature, you need me back. I said, well, you're absolutely right. I need you back. So she came back. And then the other wrinkle for us, those of you who knew Dave Bishop, I knew him from lobbying. I knew he always had resented the Senate has more prestige than the House. And he always would be calm enough. So I invited him over for coffee and said, okay, Dave, I am prepared to say yes. However, you have to be sure, I need to know that you want to stay in the House and run for the Senate. If you want to run for the Senate, I'll run for the House. But I know as long as I've known you, you really resent the Senate. So if you want to run for the Senate, I'll run for the House, but you have to decide. He went away for 3 weeks. He called the night before, the 2 days before the close of filings and said, all right, Christine, he said, I want the seniority of being in the House and you run for the Senate. And I'm never going to hear about this again, right? And he said, right. And he lived up to it. He really did live up to it. We had a lot of fun together. You knew him. He wrote a book after he left the legislature called Bridge Building. And it opens by saying, in the legislature, there are 3 parties. There are the Republicans, there are the Democrats, and there are the bridge builders. He identified himself as a bridge builder, which I've always identified myself as the bridge builder. Because you really do need people who can bring the parties together, find something that will satisfy some of the goals of both caucuses, both parties, both authors of the bill, so that you can get to what is the common good. And he was a bridge builder. And his book is wonderful, and it's full of stories. Those of you who are was a student here interested in political science, a wonderful book to read. And I will tell you something, as much as I like the book, I'm annoyed with him because almost not once does he mention any of the things we did together. He takes credit for everything. And that is the way of politics. There's 1,000 people to blame, but people rush to take credit. And my example is the volleyball center. You ever go out to the National Volleyball Center here? Okay, so the county commissioner, Chuck Stewart, was on the Amateur Sports Commission, worked really hard to get state funding, wanted the state funding for the volleyball center, tried year after year, and it wasn't happening. Finally, I was on the committee. And so they brought it before, and I to get the Senate finally to agree to fund the volleyball center. Woo-hoo. So we have the big ribbon coming for the volleyball center, right? Go out to the volleyball center, and they have the ribbon cutting, and they talk about the man whose idea it was, Chuck Stewart, and the man who made it happen, Dave Bishop. And they have a bronze plaque with the bust of both of them. That's politics. That's politics. You can't care who gets the credit if you're getting something done for your community. If you're getting the right policy, you can't care who gets the credit. But, here I am. He's dead. Dave's dead. Great defendant acquisition on it. It does get you. I mean, but you really can't have to think long term. So I want to tell you another story that was pivotal for me in my years in the legislature, which was my first year in the legislature. The proposal was to add gay, lesbian, and transgender people to the Human Rights Act. That was enormously. Busloads of people would arrive without appointment and demand to see you. I was called to meet with various church groups. It was a really intense debate, and it's hard for people to imagine now. But 40 years ago, 30 some years ago, that was kind of out there. That was kind of out there. We've gotten much more accustomed to talking about gay, lesbian, and transgender people than we were in those days. It was not something that people were comfortable with. So it so happened that in the Republican caucus, when I was first elected, there were 21 of us. Of the 21, 9 were moderates. I told you 3 were pro-choice. But it also so happened that 3 freshman Republicans were on the Senate Judiciary Committee. And that was the first committee to hear the bill. If a bill dies in the committee, it's often just dead for the session. So there was a lot of pressure on the Judiciary Committee members to vote no. Well, the three Republicans, Martha Robertson, Dave Knudsen, who's now a judge, and I, like, oh my gosh. I mean, we're just barely here and we've got this controversial thing with bustles of people. What are we gonna do? So we asked him with our caucus leader and said, here's what we're hearing. And, he wasn't any help at all, which was kind of surprising. And so we just talked among ourselves, like, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? Because we know the caucus doesn't support this. But the three of us do. What are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? So the morning that the bill was coming before the Senate Judiciary Committee, a little efficiency apartment in St. Paul, and I'm standing in the bathroom, combing my hair, and looking at myself. And I said to myself, Sheila, you didn't really want this job anyway. You're only going to be here X amount of time, no matter how long you're here. This is a phase of life. And when you leave the Senate, you're going to want to be able to look yourself in the eye, in the mirror again. So the important thing for you to do is speak through what you think the core values are. So you can look yourself in the eye. So I went and I voted, yeah, me. Then it passed the House and it went to the floor of the Senate. Now, in the Senate, when you're having floor debates, everybody's talking, there might be someone presenting a bill, but this was an evening session, so that people could come, and both galleries were absolutely filled with people. We had protesters up and down the stairway, and then sat down, and when we had the debate, silent. Everyone just sat at the chair. No one was looking around. Everyone was listening to each of the speakers. And the minority leader was Dean Johnson, a Lutheran pastor from Minnesota. And Dean got up to speak. He was also like, I forgot what military title in the Minnesota National Guard, but Minnesota National Guard. And he got up to speak after going on for a while. And everyone really hushed down now. It's the minority leader speaking. And he said, I have debated this for weeks. I've talked to my parishioners. I've talked to my colleagues. And I'm going to tell you that I forgot her name. There's so-and-so who is a colonel in the Minnesota National Guard. She's a lesbian. And she is someone that I know and I trust. And on the basis of that relationship, on the basis of the thought I've given this, he never brought in the message of Christ or what God wants. I'm going to vote yes. He voted yes, it passed by one vote. And he leaned over. I happened to sit like right there. His desk was here and mine was there. He leaned over and he said, if it weren't for you and Martha, I never would. And that sometimes is politics, personalities. It's having the courage. It's encouraging somebody else, trying to find common ground as much as you can, so that people get some of what they want out of the political decision that's being made. And it's trying to respect the differences. So the thing about the Senate particularly was those days, it was not nearly as partisan as it is now. And you could find that. You could have the bridge builders that would work to make things happen. So I had 14 years there, and I was a leader in health and human services issues, which directly out of the 9 years I'd worked for Olmsted County. And the work I've done, worked in a job training program, and I worked with Planned Parenthood, so I draw on all of that experience. So there's the policy part, as Amy said, there's the personalities. Is the person there to serve, or is the person there because they like the status? Is the person there because they like the social life that used to surround the Senate? Some people really love the social life that surrounded the Senate and the deference that comes senators, that kind of thing. Or are you there because of a particular political philosophy and you want to advance that political philosophy? But are you able to put aside your political philosophy to find the common good? And more we're unable to find that common good. We're into wanting to control all. We're into not wanting into sort of identity politics, if you will. And as we get more and more people who focus that way, then the power of the positions. So Amy mentioned that when I got thrown out of the Republican Party and invited by Roger, actually it was Dean Johnson, who, by the way, had been a Republican who left to become a Democrat, who was now the majority leader, to join their caucus. They made me a committee chair, which is very unusual. And I was a finance committee chair for my last 2 years of legislature. And that's usually, you have to be a policy committee chair. It's a seniority kind of thing. So in the legislature, the chairs of committees decide what the agenda is going to be. So you can submit bills, but the chairs of committees and the bills are assigned to various committees. And the chair of each committee decides what bills they're actually going to hear. And of course, that's often an encouragement, shall we say, of their caucus leadership. So there is power that goes with the position. But I'm talking to, he's left, but talking to someone as we started this evening. I never had a strong party identity. When Nancy and David invited me to run, encouraged me to run, I had to choose. I'm going to run as a Democrat or I'm going to run as a Republican. And I came out of a Democratic farmer labor. It was sort of like you were Catholic and you were Democratic farmer labor, where I grew up. That was it. Two identity things that were part of your family heritage. But we hadn't elected a Democrat in Olmsted County out of Olmsted County in maybe 25 years, the point that I ran. And so they were both moderate Republicans and pro-choice Republicans. And I thought, okay, I can do that. But there was never a goodness of fit. The party got more and more conservative. As the Tea Party came forward, as the party got more and more conservative. So not surprising, I was not endorsed. In 1996, 11 people came to my endorsing convention. Oh, in 2000, 11 people came to my endorsing convention. In 2002, 300 came. It's kind of a message. We don't want you. You're not going to be. So I ran an independence party. It was the year when Ventura was leaving and he was running for governor. It's independence party. And 60 of us ran independence party in Minnesota. Only one of us won. And I think I won because people in this community understood that I wasn't that partisan, that I really did try to represent the community. And that was my focus, is how do we have better services for the people that live here. So then I went back to my consulting practice. I actually didn't come back to Rochester for a while. I worked up in the Twin Cities. I was burned out on partisan politics, and some of the partisans locally just didn't want to have to deal with it. And I also thought if I'm in the Twin Cities, I can have a different range of consulting that I can have on the same kind of things that I did before if I came back here. But after 6 years, I was recruited to run for the county board. Now I hadn't been planning to do that, but I was approached by some people who are no longer county commissioners. One of them's name was Mike Podolke, and encouraged to run for county board. And honestly, I really love being on the county board because it is nonpartisan, because you really are focused on how do we have good services for people? How do we keep taxes within reason? How do we really focus on what's to the benefit of our community? And I also just want to say that you are important to all of those political decisions that we make. Whether it's at the county level, I really hear from people at the county level compared to when I was in the legislature. And partly it's because when the state legislature passes lots of things, it impacts lots of people's lives. When the city council decides they're going to change the zoning law, it affects your property and you will have an opinion about it. If they're going to approve multifamily housing to go in the corner down by your house, you have an opinion. If they're putting in trails, how wide are those trails? In my neighborhood, a 12-foot wide trail, really? 12 feet wide, really? And people care about it because it's affecting their daily life. In the county, it's not that way, because while 25% of our residents are on medical assistance, that means that they're low-income people. Who wants to go before the county board and complain? It's very difficult to do that. So they go to the legislators and get them to try and change the law. So the and the county works very much as a board of directors rather than as policymakers. Because a lot of what happens at the county level is really decided by the legislative policymakers. It's not really, the county board gets to decide how, not what. The number of changes that the county board really gets to decide what they're going to do is limited compared to how they're going to get it done. And sometimes they have to say, wait a minute, we have problems here with mental health services. There are not enough mental health services. That's one of the counties all over the state are saying, we have a failed mental health system in Minnesota. We need to improve mental health services. No county can do it alone. So the Association of Counties right now has got a group meeting to try and talk about how do we improve mental health services. But what will happen? The county will end up having to do how do we do it? How are we going to do it? It's very different. So they don't have a lot of flex in the budget to be able to do things that aren't already required or already funded by another source of government. But it means that the conversations can be really friendly. We don't always agree. County board members don't always. And there are times that, decisions are made that more of a wooden line. And it sticks to the cross sometimes. But if there's 7 people, you're going to be with that same 7 people next. You're not going to be off in different committees. You're not going to have partisan. And why I fought so hard last year about the partisanship is that once you start getting organized groups going to individual elected officials and saying, we helped you get elected, and now we expect you to vote the way we want you to vote. And that's not necessarily informed with all the information. I think it was from Massachusetts famous senator who said, I vote the way that I think the majority of my constituents would vote if they had access to the information I have. And you don't as citizens. I mean, I know I read the paper now and I think, I really wonder what else was going on with that because you don't have all the information. You have your own lived experience. You have your own perception, but you don't have all the information. You don't have all the data. That's what the board of commissioners is intended to do, is to work with the professional staff to look at the data, to look at options, to weigh options, and to choose the best alternative, which is different than what happens in the legislature, where you have a party who has a position or an organized group that has a position. And so I helped you get elected. So there, I want you better do what I say, because otherwise, that's what the threat is, right? Look what's happening at the national level. That's what's wrong right now. Is if you don't like if you don't do what I want, then I'm gonna put you in a primary. I'm gonna go after you in the next election. And that's not the best way to make good, solid decisions. So when you think about your role, I think of it this way. I think of it like a target. And I had a hand up. My day has been a really bumpy. I was supposed to go to the cities for a meeting, and that far as Cannon Falls, and my car broke down. So I had to call a tow truck, and we pulled back here, and then went home, grabbed a bite to eat, came here, and left the 50 copies that I had is in my briefcase at home. So I had one of the things that I had is a graphic for you, which is imagine a bullseye. 3 rings of the bullseye. In the inner ring of the bullseye are, as an elected official, are your intimate. They're the people that you most rely on for information. Usually your spouse is in there, your friends, your family, but they're also people that you just know. So, I know that if I want to know something about finance, I might call Bob Benzik and ask him for some advice, which I have been known to do. If I have a question, so Jeff Robrook, who just died, famous for knowing about nitrates. You wanted to know something about nitrates? I have no offense, wouldn't go to Stephanie, I'd go to Robrook. So you have those intimates that really acknowledge. And so here's a story about it. When I was in the legislature, Dean Miriam was famous for being this really solid senator. And there was a time that there was a bill that the nurse anesthetist wanted that Mayo Clinic was absolutely opposed to, and which I had successfully defeated in committee twice. And They ran this whole campaign. I got more Christmas cards from Nurse Anesthetists than any other source. I had more Christmas cards from Nurse Anesthetists than families and friends wanting their bill to pass. So the bill passed out of committee. This divided bill passed out of committee, went to the floor of the Senate. It was not a good bill. I don't remember the details of it. And it passed. And Jean Miriam voted. Jean Miriam voted. So I stumbled over to Jean's Senator. I was I was still intimidated. Jean, Senator. So I noticed you voted for that Senate file. That really surprised me because it's not consistent with your philosophy and the way you approach things. I said, well, can you help me understand why you voted for it? And he said, well, looked around, looked up. Would it help you to know that my wife is a nurse anesthetist? The intimates, right? He's not gonna go home and say, honey, I voted no. Okay, so then the next circle are the people who help you get elected. These are people, that's why, organizing for campaigns, who are the volunteers that are working? Because, I still remember Kathy Meyerly showing up. She'd been Dave Bishop's campaign person. She worked on every one of my campaigns. So if Kathy Meyerly called me about something, you bet I would take that call no matter how busy I was, right? Because Kathy Meyerly was always there for me. And then there are the official lobbyists. And the lobbyists can get a really bad name. They're like, I don't know, when I was there, 1,800 lobbyists compared to 200 legislators. Another nice thing about county government is and they're often a source of information that you don't otherwise have. So that there's some value to lobbying. And you are lobbyists. You are advocates and lobbyists on the issues you care about. And when you go and lobby on the issues you care about, you are calling out to that person. You represent me. The decision you're going to make is going to affect my life, or I have a strong opinion about this. And so you have a very legitimate role in lobbying. Then there's the district. Just sort of thinking generally what's going to be good for my district. So when you go to be an advocate for anything, the more personal you can be, the more influence you're going to have. So we're having rallies where people are showing up, mass rallies right now. That has impact. In fact, you might be interested to know that I just recently read that Kristen Chenoweth, who's at Harvard, wrote a book 10 years ago. She did a study of peaceful protest and violent protest, violent civil unrest, peaceful civil unrest and violent civil unrest. She looked at countries all over the world. And she and her researchers concluded that if 3.5% of a population, well, first of all, they concluded that peaceful civil unrest has a greater opportunity of more success in creating change than violent. Okay, that's good news. Second thing is, if 3.5% of a population show up with a position on an issue, even if it's like an aristocracy, a dictatorship, or 3.5% of the population, they succeed. So there is a place for demonstrating that there is massive 3.5%. It's still about 5,000 people here, right? But 3.5%, it's not that unattainable, and it's happened around the world. Okay? So that's kind of encouraging. However, if you are in that intimate circle or you're an advocate, the more personal you can make it. So don't send emails, but I always think that right now, handwritten letter is more likely to reach an elected official. County board, they're going to read your emails. Legislators, congressmen, probably their staff are going to read them. And the staff are going to say, this is the trend line. Because with back to nurse anesthetists, the time I voted no in committee, after we got computers, we didn't have computers when I was first there. So got back to my seat on the floor of the Senate, and I had 650 emails from the nurse anesthetists complaining about my vote in committee. Well, obviously 650 people didn't sit down and send those, and they weren't all different, and I didn't answer 650 of them. I did scan to see if they were constituents and answered the constituent. So that has an impact, but a personal letter, a phone call from the person that the neighbor, you know, is he still here? Ed Cohen. If Ed Cohen talks to me about something, I listen. And I were neighbors. We did things. We were at some of the same committees. So you listen to the people. That's just human nature. And where we are today in our Minnesota politics, in our local politics, in our national politics, our voices need to be heard because we are in fraught times. Now, the good news is we've been through fraught times before. In fact, I was watching a video the other day. It was from Princeton, I'm not sure where it's from, but it was a history of populist movements in the United States back to the 1800s. And I didn't even think of some of the populist movements I've lived through. But we've lived through populist movements before. And so I have to not believe we're in times when change is impossible. Because not every voice has been heard. Not all views are table, and we're already seeing some things happen. My biggest worry, here's my big worry, is that we really need to preserve the integrity of our democracy with the balance of power and with the rule of law. So while there's all these things happening that I'm worried about what's going to happen, county government, my gosh, the needs aren't going to go away. The people are still going to need the services, and how in the heck? Those of us with 401ks are like, maybe I won't do that, but what's going to do? And we're already seeing people now. So it has an impact. But we really, our voices, our effort to create change, it's on us. And the biggest thing, while there's all these things that are concerned, my biggest worry is how do we preserve the democracy? How do we preserve the rule of law, the integrity of our courts, power? I happened to speak to Tim Penny today, who's hiring from Southern Minnesota Initiative Foundation. And he tells me that there was a group out of Princeton University who started looking at Congress and its loss of authority and power several years ago. So this has just been a trend from many people who've been in Congress, see the erosion of the power of Congress. And so Princeton University has a number of papers that were put together by a variety of voices, a variety of sources to look at how do we preserve Congress authority and ability to govern. I think that's a really, really critical. So I warned Amy that I can talk forever and I can tell you more stories, but I think I'm sure you're thoroughly bored. So, a few questions, Amy says.
People have some questions they'd like to ask.
When are you writing your book to have your side of the
Yeah. I don't think that's in my future, but thank you.
We do have one chapter about her in our Taking the Lead book, but it's fact. Get read whole.
Anne has them back in the corner. And actually, that book that Amy reminded me of that. Amy put that book together. Amy and the League put together. And when you read that, those of you, especially these young women that are here today, think about 50 years ago, we didn't have women in elected office, and that book covers. It's called Taking the Lead, and it covers that period really of the 70s into the 80s when women began to move into leadership positions, and elected leadership positions, and organizational leadership positions, and demand change. So when I was an undergraduate, it was unusual for a woman to go to law school. By the time I decided to go to law school in the middle 70s and applied, ended up going to work for the county instead. Third of the class were going to be women, and now more women graduating in law school and medicine, I think, too, than men. So there's been a dramatic change, but it's really fun to go back and read that history. So, anybody else? Yes.
Your road or route to being an elected official is, yeah. Your road to being an elected official has been somewhat non-traditional, and so for those who are interested in becoming or running for office, being an elected, what would you say is the experience, the skill set that is required to be or to hold an elected office versus learning on the job.
Amanda, thank you for that. My generation, women were asked to run. That was very typical. Nancy was kind of exceptional. Tim Norton's been kind of exceptional because she decided to run for school board and then the legislature, looking around thinking, I can do this. So if you know you want to run for elected office, then I think it's some relevant experience. What office do you think you want to be part of? What is the issue? What are the issues that are deepest concern to you? Some people run for office because they want the status of being an elected official. I tend not to respect those people very much, and I tend to find that they don't make very good elected officials. But those people who run for office who've had some real life experience, they want to make a difference in some aspect, or they want to represent a particular point of view, make a difference. So I'm trying to look here at. I'm thinking of Mark. I don't know what Mark why you originally decided to run for township officer, but you served 18 years as township officer, and then you said, "I'm ready for county board." And everybody's story is a little bit different, but I'm always suspicious of people who say, "I just want to be in office." What difference do you want to make? What do you offer? What is your experience that's relevant to the difference you want to make? And so choose the topic. Maybe you love education. Maybe you're concerned about healthcare. Maybe you're environmentally concerned. So what are some volunteer things you can do in the community or professionally to gain the experience that you have? You have experience and knowledge to draw on. And I look into the other elected officials here. Is there anything else any of you would add for people who are thinking about running? Run, work on a campaign. That's a really good way. I had never worked on a campaign. That was one of the things I said to Nancy. She said, "You don't seem to understand. I'm going to run your campaign. And keep this in mind. You're the candidate. I am in charge." So that was a really great apprenticeship. I learned how to. Most of us, looking at Stephanie, Mark, most of us just gather a group of friends and say, "I want to run." And the chamber offers campaign school. There's a variety of organizations, particularly for women, that offer campaign training. Chamber will do it again next year. I'm seeing Karen Laughlин's nodding her head. So whether both parties run, if you're running for partisan office, there are ways you can be trained. Anyone else? Yeah.
Why write a letter to somebody who totally disagrees with me, or just important to change their mind? Is there a point in writing and telling the people that already agree with me that I got a good idea?
Can you hear them? Tim, I think it's kind of both them. When if you're an elected official and you feel like you're in the minority, hearing from your constituents that they support what you're doing gives you backbone. Okay? On the other hand, if your constituents write to you and say, "I disagree with what you're doing," that also gives you pause. So and I think in some ways it depends on the topic of how entrenched is this person. But I would say, making this up right now a little bit, but Amy Klobuchar probably doesn't need a lot of accolades, because she's so solid. So writing to Amy Klobuchar, maybe writing to your congressman who may not have, he's got to run every 2 years and he's in a different position. I think there's that way as well. Does that make sense to people?
What's the antidote to, you speak of the erosion of the power of Congress? What's the antidote? How do we turn that around as a civil society?
If I had an answer, I'll tell you what I'm thinking about. That's why I called Tim Penny. I think citizens have to say to our members of Congress, irrespective of the issues, You're only going to be in office so many years. When you leave that office, you need to leave it with the integrity of the institution. Your job is to protect the integrity of the institution as well as the policies that the current administration wants or that are currently in vogue. The integrity of our democracy is the most important thing for you to protect. And I think we need to say that to all of our members of Congress, including Amy Klobuchar. And I think that we also hopefully will have enough of us say it and find some people who have influence to say it to who are in the intimate circle as well. So my question to Tim was, sort of the same question you have. I have an idea that I shared with him. He liked the idea, which is it's time for people who've been in office to stand up and say, you need to protect the integrity of the institution. But we as citizens need to. Does that make sense?
I think